Every morning, one of the richest men walked through that door. No bodyguards or driver, just a newspaper, black coffee, and a secret. Same booth, same order, same exact $10 bill, left behind without a word. Every single morning, for 3 years. To the world, he was a name on skyscrapers. But inside that diner, he was no one at all. And that was exactly how he wanted it. She had bills piling up she could barely explain, a promise to keep that no one knew about, and a stranger's $10 that never made sense.
For 3 years, the question had waited. And in the quiet of that ordinary Tuesday morning, the truth behind the same...
If you have ever wondered what a stranger's small, quiet habit might be hiding, stay with this story until the very end, because the truth behind it will stay with you long after the video ends. And if stories like this move you, take a second right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because more stories like Mara's are coming, and you will not want to miss them. Every weekday morning, rain or shine, Mara Jensen unlocked the doors of Lonnie's diner at exactly 6 o'clock. The diner sat on the corner of a street that had seen better decades, wedged between a shuttered hardware store and a laundromat that never seemed to close. The bell above the door had a crack in its rim, so instead of a clean chime, it made a slightly hollow, uneven sound, like a bell that had been rung one too many times and was starting to tire of the job. Mara didn't mind. She had worked there for 9 years, ever since she was 26, and the sound of that broken bell had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She was a single mother to a 10-year-old boy named Eli, a bright, curious kid who loved dinosaurs and asked questions faster than she could answer them. Eli's father had left before Eli turned 2, and in the years since, Mara had built a life out of double shifts, secondhand furniture, and a stubborn refusal to let her son grow up thinking the world owed him nothing but hardship. She waited tables at Lonnie's in the mornings and did the books for a small accounting firm 2 nights a week, squeezing hours out of days that never seemed to have enough of them. At exactly 6:45 every morning, the bell would give its tired little ring, and a man named Julian Ashford would walk in. He always sat in the same corner booth, the one with the slightly wobbly table that Mara had long since fixed with a folded napkin under one leg. He always ordered the same thing: black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. He read an actual paper newspaper, which even 9 years ago had started to feel like a quiet act of rebellion against a world that was moving on without him. And every single morning when he left, he tucked a $10 bill under the edge of his plate, folded in half the same way, for a $5 breakfast. At first, Mara assumed he was simply generous. Some customers were. But as weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, the pattern never changed. Not once. Not for a $10 bill that was slightly worn, not for a $5 breakfast, not for a stranger who never seemed to want anything more than his coffee and his silence. She noticed, too, that he never seemed rushed. He was clearly not a construction worker or a delivery driver stopping in before a long shift. His suits, though understated, were clearly expensive, the kind of fabric that moved differently under diner light. But he never explained himself, and Mara never asked. In a neighborhood like theirs, people learned early not to pry into each other's business. Everyone was carrying something, and most people preferred to carry it quietly. It was Mara's coworker, a talkative dishwasher named Reuben, who first put a name to the man's face. "You know who that is, right?" he'd said one slow Tuesday afternoon, nodding toward the corner booth after Julian had already left. "That's Julian Ashford. Like the Julian Ashford, Ashford Capital. The guy owns like half the buildings downtown." Mara had laughed, certain Reuben was exaggerating the way he always did, but a quick search on her phone that night proved him right. Julian Ashford was, in fact, listed among the wealthiest men in the state, a self-made investor who had turned a small real estate firm into an empire over 3 decades. His net worth had more zeros than Mara could comfortably picture attached to a real, living, breathing human being. Least of all one who ate eggs over easy in a booth with a wobbly table leg. Knowing who he was should have changed something, but it didn't, not really. He still came in at 6:45. He still ordered the same breakfast. He still left the same $10 bill, folded the same careful way. If anything, Mara found herself more puzzled than before. A man with that kind of money could tip $100 without blinking, could buy the entire diner if he felt like it on a whim. Instead, he tipped exactly what a kind, ordinary regular might tip, no more, no less, day after day, year after year, as though the amount itself meant something specific that had nothing to do with generosity for generosity's sake. Mara's life outside those morning shifts was not an easy one. The accounting firm had cut her hours the previous winter, and the gap in her paycheck had landed at the worst possible time. Eli needed new shoes for the growing feet that never seemed to stop growing. His class was raising money for a science trip to the State Museum, and the ancient sedan Mara drove had started making a sound under the hood that she was actively trying not to think about. The way you try not to think about a smoke detector's dying battery beep at 3 in the morning. She had started picking up extra shifts wherever she could find them, but there were only so many hours in a day, and only so much a diner waitress's paycheck could stretch. One particular Thursday, everything seemed to collide at once. The car made its ominous noise the whole drive to work. A voicemail from Eli's school reminded her, not unkindly but firmly, that the museum trip payment was due by Friday. And when she checked her bank balance in the back hallway of the diner during her lunch break, the number staring back at her felt like a small, cold slap. She stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, trying to breathe through the tight feeling in her chest, the particular exhaustion of loving someone completely and not being able to give them everything you wished you could. She composed herself, because that was what she always did, and went back out onto the floor. And there, in his usual booth, was Julian Ashford, folding his newspaper with that same unhurried calm he always carried, as if the world outside those windows moved at a different speed than it did for everyone else. Mara refilled his coffee without a word, the way she had 1,000 times before. But this time something in her had shifted, some quiet threshold crossed without her fully deciding to cross it. As she set down the coffee pot, she found herself saying, before she could stop herself, "Can I ask you something?" Julian looked up, mild surprise crossing his face, though not unkindness. In 9 years, Mara realized she had never actually initiated a conversation beyond the necessary exchanges of ordering and serving. "Of course," he said, folding the newspaper fully closed and setting it aside, giving her his full attention in a way that startled her slightly. "Every day," Mara said, glancing briefly toward the counter to make sure no one needed her. "You order the same $5 breakfast and you leave the same $10 bill, same fold every time, for 3 years. I guess I've just always wondered why." For a moment, Julian said nothing. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her, and something in his expression softened into a kind of tired, gentle honesty that Mara hadn't seen from him before. "That's the first time anyone's asked me that in a long time," he said quietly. "Sit down a moment, if you can spare it." Mara glanced again toward the counter, where Reuben gave her a small nod, silently covering for her. She sat. Julian told her that decades earlier, before Ashford Capital existed, before any of the buildings downtown carried his name, he had been a young man with nothing but a duffel bag and a bus ticket, arriving in this very city after losing almost everything back home, a business that failed, a marriage that ended, a father who had recently passed. He had wandered into a diner much like this one, on a morning much like this one, with exactly $4.30 to his name and a hunger that had nothing to do with pride. The waitress that morning, an older woman whose name he never learned, had brought him a full breakfast anyway, telling him simply that the register had made a mistake and the meal was already covered. He always suspected she paid for it out of her own tip jar, though she never admitted it, and he never had the money that day to leave anything behind but a quiet, humiliated thank you. He never forgot that morning. He built his company slowly, painfully, over years of failure and stubbornness, and every time he thought about giving up, he thought about that plate of eggs a stranger gave a broke, humiliated man for no reason beyond simple kindness. When Ashford Capital finally became successful beyond anything he'd imagined, he made a private promise to himself. He would spend one meal each day, in one diner somewhere, as an anonymous customer, And he would leave a tip worth exactly double what a struggling waitress might earn in an hour back then, folded the same careful way that $10 bill had once been folded when he'd finally paid it back to that same woman years later, before she passed. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was a private ritual of gratitude, a small, repeated act meant to remind him where he came from, no matter how far he traveled from it. "I chose this diner because it reminded me of that one," he told Mara. "And I chose you, all those years ago, because you never once treated me like anything other than a regular customer who liked his eggs over easy. You have no idea how rare that is for someone in my position." Mara sat with that for a long moment, feeling something complicated rise in her chest, a mixture of humility and quiet grief for a version of him she had never known existed. She told him, hesitantly, about Eli, about the museum trip, about the car, about the impossible math of stretching one income across every corner of a child's growing life. She hadn't meant to unload all of it onto a customer's table, but something about his honesty had loosened something in her too. Julian listened without interrupting, the way people rarely do anymore. When she finished, he didn't reach for his wallet the way she half expected, half feared he might, turning her into a charity case in an instant. Instead, he asked if she'd ever considered that her gift for remembering every regular's order, for keeping the diner running smoothly during understaffed shifts, for handling difficult customers with unshakable patience, might be worth more somewhere else. He mentioned almost in passing that Ashford Capital's Community Foundation was quietly looking for someone to help manage a small program supporting working single parents, someone who understood the daily reality of it rather than just the statistics on a page. "It wasn't charity," he said carefully, seeing the guarded look cross her face. "It was a job with a fair salary that happened to exist because of exactly the kind of struggle she'd just described." Mara didn't say yes that day. She was too proud, too wary of anything that felt too easy, too aware of how quickly kindness could curdle into obligation. But she took the card he offered, tucked between the folded newspaper and the same worn $10 bill he still left behind that morning, the last one he would ever need to leave in quite the same quiet, anonymous way. Over the following weeks, Mara turned the offer over in her mind more times than she could count, torn between suspicion and hope, between independence and the exhaustion of doing everything alone. Eventually, driven less by desperation and more by a cautious, curious kind of courage, she called the number on the card. The interview process was ordinary and professional, nothing like a favor being quietly arranged behind the scenes. She got the job on her own merit, after answering hard questions about budgeting, community outreach, and the quiet logistics of helping people who were one bad week away from losing everything. Julian still came into the diner sometimes, though less often now that Mara wasn't the one serving him every morning. When he did, he sat in the same booth, ordered the same breakfast, and this time, instead of leaving quietly, he'd wave to Mara through the kitchen pass and she'd wave back, no longer a stranger's quiet mystery but something closer to an old friend who understood exactly why that $10 bill had always mattered so much more than its face value. Eli got his shoes and his museum trip, and eventually a stable home that didn't shake every time an unexpected bill arrived in the mail. Mara kept a folded $10 bill in the drawer of her new office desk, the very last one Julian ever left at that corner booth, not because she needed the money, but because she needed the reminder that sometimes the smallest, quietest habits carry the heaviest histories, and that the courage to finally ask a simple question can change the direction of more than one life at once. Years later, when people at the foundation asked Mara why she was so patient with every new family who walked through their doors nervous and ashamed to ask for help, she would sometimes tell them about a rich man's $10 tip, folded the same way every single morning for 3 quiet years, and the plate of eggs a stranger once bought for a desperate young man decades before either of their stories had truly begun. Kindness, she'd tell them, rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time, it simply waits patiently in a corner booth, folded neatly, until somebody finally has the courage to ask why.